The glass slipped from her fingers before it even touched her lips. Vanessa's mother, Linda, collapsed right there on my kitchen floor, her body twitching, foam bubbling at the corners of her mouth, a half-finished toast still lingering in the air. And as I knelt beside her, pretending to be the concerned host, only one thought echoed in my mind. That drink was never meant for her. It was meant for me. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments below. It helps more than you know, and your voice truly matters. Now, let me tell you how I got here. I'm Robert Mitchell, 72 years old, recently retired, and very much alive, though someone clearly didn't plan for that to be the case. Just hours before, this very house had been filled with warmth, laughter, and clinking glasses. My son Daniel and his wife Vanessa had insisted on throwing me a retirement party, a grand send-off after I sold my software firm for $18 million. It was supposed to be a celebration. But when the woman who always complained about hosting so much as a backyard barbecue suddenly transformed into a five-star party planner overnight, polishing crystal, arranging flowers, hiring bartenders, I knew something was off. Vanessa had never done anything without a reason. And this party reeked of effort that had nothing to do with love. It wasn't the compliments, or the smiles, or even the overpriced champagne that tipped me off. It was the way she glanced over her shoulder before pouring something from a small glass vial into my chipped champagne flute, the one I always used. She didn't know I saw. She didn't know I'd already begun to suspect, and she certainly didn't know I'd learned long ago that sometimes the best way to catch a predator is to play the prey. This story isn't just about a failed murder attempt. It's about legacy, betrayal, and the price some people are willing to pay when they think they're entitled to your ending. 2 hours earlier, the kitchen had been alive with warmth and celebration. Friends I hadn't seen in years filled my home, voices overlapping with laughter, music floating just beneath the chatter. I'd sold my company, Mitchell Analytics, for $18 million the week before. Not bad for a business I'd built from scratch in my garage after my wife died, pouring everything I had into it while raising Daniel on my own. "Dad, you have to let us throw something special," he'd said, that familiar, earnest look on his face. "You've earned it," Vanessa had chimed in with a wide smile. "Don't worry about a thing, Robert. Just relax and enjoy." That should have been my first clue. Vanessa, who once threw a fit over hosting Thanksgiving, now suddenly wanted to plan a full-scale catered event. Flowers, charcuterie towers, imported wine, a jazz trio in the backyard. No, this wasn't just generosity. This was strategy. I remember watching her move through the room, laughing a little too loudly, brushing invisible lint from her designer dress, touching everyone's arm just long enough to make it feel staged. She was nervous. That's when I saw it. She stood by the champagne table, away from the crowd, pretending to check her lipstick in the mirror above the sideboard. Her hand slipped into her purse and pulled out a tiny dark glass vial. She looked left, then right, then leaned forward and emptied its contents into a particular champagne flute, the one with the faint chip on the rim, a barely visible imperfection. I always used to spot my glass in a crowd. My stomach turned cold. No one else noticed, but I did. I didn't say a word. I simply turned back to the small group I was talking to, nodded at whatever industry gossip they were exchanging, and waited. Moments later, Vanessa approached with the poisoned glass, her expression the picture of concerned affection. "Robert, you look tired," she said gently, holding out the flute. "Here, have some champagne. Let's toast to your incredible career." I took it, smiled, thanked her, and let her believe it had worked. 10 minutes later, when she was busy bragging about her handmade Italian bracelet to a neighbor, I made my move. Linda, her mother, was standing near the buffet, looking around absently. She didn't have a drink. Perfect. I walked over, set the doctored champagne next to her plate, and struck up casual conversation. Within minutes, she picked up the glass without a second thought. 5 minutes after that, she was swaying on her feet. "Is it hot in here?" she mumbled, blinking slowly. "This champagne tastes odd." Then she went down, convulsing, foam on her lips. Screams erupted. Someone called 911. Vanessa cried out for help with just the right amount of hysteria. Daniel rushed over, pale, confused. Or maybe just pretending to be. I watched his face carefully. There was something more than shock in his eyes. He glanced at his wife for half a second longer than necessary, as though searching for cues. That was when I knew this wasn't just her plan. He was in on it too. Maybe not the poisoning, maybe he didn't know that detail. But he knew something. He had to. The paramedics arrived quickly. As they loaded Linda onto the stretcher, still breathing but barely conscious, I watched Vanessa from the corner of my eye. Her manicured hands trembled as she clutched her clutch purse. Her face was frozen in shock, but her eyes were scanning everything, calculating. Vanessa had always been clever in a dangerous way. She knew exactly how to turn charm into control. I'd tolerated her for years, mostly for Daniel's sake. But now she'd gone too far. "Which hospital?" I asked the lead paramedic. "Cedar Ridge Medical," he replied. "You family?" "Close enough," I said, eyeing Vanessa as I grabbed my keys. "I'll follow." Daniel stepped in quickly. "Dad, don't worry about it. You stay here, we'll keep you updated, I promise." I smiled. "Nonsense. Linda's a guest in my home. The least I can do is make sure she's all right." The truth was, I didn't want to be left behind in a house where someone had tried to murder me, not while the perpetrators were scrambling to fix their failed attempt. At the hospital, I kept my distance but close enough to listen. The doctors called it acute poisoning. They mentioned something about plant alkaloids, not the kind of thing you get from undercooked shrimp. No, this was intentional. Specific. Someone had done their research. I made mental notes. Vanessa couldn't sit still. Her high heels clicked against the linoleum like a metronome set to panic. Daniel didn't look much better. He barely touched his phone, which buzzed endlessly in his lap. I caught a few glances between them, tight, urgent, and unspoken. Something was unraveling. "This is just awful," Vanessa said for the fourth time. "Poor Mom, how could this happen?" I patted her arm. "Things like this can be so strange. Hopefully the doctors can figure it out." Then, letting the bait hang, I added, "It's lucky she didn't finish that champagne. I think she only had a few sips before she collapsed." Vanessa froze. It was subtle, but I noticed. Her jaw clenched for the briefest moment, her hand tightening around her coffee cup. "Champagne? You think that caused it?" "Oh, who knows," I said with a casual shrug. "Just an old man's silly theories. Probably nothing," but I could see the panic behind her eyes. She didn't know whether I was bluffing or not, and that was exactly where I wanted her. 3 hours later, we were still at the hospital, and Linda was finally declared stable. She'd be kept overnight for observation, but the doctors admitted they couldn't pinpoint the exact toxin yet. Still, they ruled out food poisoning. "Something ingested, possibly botanical in nature," one of them said to a nurse within my earshot. Botanical, so it really was poison. Oleander, belladonna, foxglove. There were plenty of plants that could drop a grown person with a few drops if prepared right. Whoever had done this had done their homework. And that someone had a French manicure, a fake concern for my well-being, and a desperate need for fast money. As we walked toward the parking lot, Vanessa kept up her performance. "Robert, are you sure you don't want to stay with us tonight?" she asked sweetly, her voice trembling just enough. "After what happened, we'd feel so much better if you weren't alone." She even added a gentle hand to my arm, all concerned daughter-in-law energy. I smiled at her, controlled and calm. "That's kind of you, dear, but I think I'll be all right. I've got that new security system installed last month. Motion sensors, cameras, the works. I'll sleep just fine." Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside her, forcing a smile. "Of course, Dad. Just offering. If you need anything, I'll let you know," I said smoothly. I watched them in my rearview mirror as I pulled out two silhouettes locked in a tense conversation, their gestures tight and sharp. Whatever they were planning next, they weren't ready for how many steps ahead I already was. Back home, I poured myself a new glass of champagne from a sealed bottle, of course, and sat in my study, flipping on the desk lamp. I didn't need sleep. I needed answers. 45 years in the tech industry had taught me a few things, not the least of which was how to dig. And when you're 72, rich, and someone just tried to kill you, insomnia is your new best friend. I made a list: Daniel and Vanessa's mortgage, their luxury cars, their private school tuition for Lily, and Vanessa's so-called luxury spa business, which I knew for a fact had been limping along for years. I'd helped them financially more times than I could count. Daniel always came with some story: late client payments, cost overruns, payroll issues. Just a short-term loan, Dad, he'd say, with that same smile he used to give me as a boy, when he'd broken the neighbor's window and blamed it on the wind. Over the past 6 years, I'd funneled them nearly $160,000. I never asked for it back. I called them gifts, trying to believe they weren't taking advantage of me. But looking at the numbers now, all I saw was a pattern, not of gratitude, but of greed. At 7:30 the next morning, my phone rang. Vanessa's voice slithered through the receiver, syrupy and strained. "Robert, I couldn't sleep last night thinking about you. After what happened to my mom, I just worry. Are you feeling okay? Any nausea, dizziness?" I smiled into the phone, letting my silence stretch a little longer than necessary. "I feel fine, actually. Slept like a rock. Thank you for checking in." "That's such a relief," she said too quickly. "The doctors think maybe Mom had a reaction to one of her medications. You know how she is with her vitamins. Probably just took something on an empty stomach." "Linda, the woman who organized her supplements with military precision? I didn't buy it for a second." "That does sound plausible," I lied. "Still, I wonder if it might have been something at the party. Maybe a tainted bottle?" "Oh no," she said quickly, the words tumbling out. "They ruled that out. Definitely not the food or drinks." The doctors were clear. The desperation in her tone was unmistakable. She needed the narrative contained, controlled. She didn't want anyone, especially me, testing that bottle of champagne still sitting in my kitchen. After we hung up, I stared at that bottle for a long time. It looked so innocent, so festive. But it was 75% full, untouched since the party. If I had it tested and it came back positive for a toxin, it would be evidence. Not that I needed it to convince myself. I'd seen her do it. But convincing the law? That would require more. And I had no intention of being the next body to hit the marble floor. At 9 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Daniel stood there with a white pastry box from my favorite bakery and an apologetic smile. "Thought you could use some breakfast," he said, holding it out like a peace offering. "You probably didn't eat much yesterday." I stepped aside and let him in. He moved through my kitchen with familiarity, opening cabinets without asking, grabbing plates like he'd never left. For a second, I saw my son. My real son. The one who used to sit at this table doing math homework while I burned frozen pizza. The boy who once told me, "I want to be like you, Dad." Now here he was, helping his wife try to murder me. "How are you holding up?" he asked gently as we sat down. "Takes more than a little party drama to rattle me," I replied. He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's what I was afraid of." "What do you mean?" I asked, sipping my coffee. "Nothing, just that. Well, Vanessa and I were talking last night. We're worried about you. Here it comes." I let him talk. "You're 72 now, Dad, alone in this big house. And after what happened yesterday, well, what if something like that happened to you, and no one was there?" He reached into his bag and pulled out a glossy brochure. "We found this place. Cypress Grove. It's like a resort. Full staff, medical personnel, community. You'd love it." I stared at the pamphlet. Pictures of smiling old men playing cards, doing Tai Chi. "There's just a one-time entrance fee, $350,000, but it covers everything." And just like that, the game moved from poison to paperwork. I turned the brochure over in my hands, pretending to read it as Daniel watched me carefully, eyes flicking from my expression to the paper and back again. I could almost see the gears turning in his head. Was I going to bite? Would I agree to walk willingly into the cozy little cage they'd picked out for me? "Cypress Grove," I said slowly, tracing the gold-embossed lettering on the front cover. "Looks peaceful." "It's not a nursing home," he said quickly, sensing my hesitation. "It's for active retirees. You'd have your own space, a golf course, a library. They even do wine tastings. It's more like a luxury condo than assisted living." I nodded, as if genuinely impressed. "And the $350,000 entrance fee? It's a lump sum," he said, keeping his tone casual. "But it covers everything for life, meals, healthcare, activities. It's actually a great deal when you think about it." Of course it was a great deal for them. That money would come straight out of my accounts. And once I was comfortably tucked away in a retirement village, all they needed was a little legal access to finish the job. "There's just one thing," Daniel added, reaching into his leather messenger bag again. They require a power of attorney on file. Someone to handle your affairs if, something ever happens. He placed the document between us on the table like a contract in a business deal, which in many ways it was. A transfer of control. I was hoping you'd consider making me that person, he said, just in case. I looked at the paper neatly typed, notarized, already filled out with my name and his. All it needed was my signature. And with that, he'd have full control over my finances, my medical decisions, my life. You've really thought this through, I said, lifting my coffee. Vanessa did most of the legwork, he said, smiling. She's just worried about you. We both are. I let out a soft chuckle. And here I thought you were still mad at me for refusing to co-sign on that home equity loan. Daniel's face tensed for a split second before he recovered. That was years ago, Dad. We've moved on. Sure you have. I let the silence stretch between us. I'll think about it, I said finally. This is a big decision. If I do this, it's not something I can easily undo, right? Technically, you could revoke it, he said. But Cypress Grove has policies. If a resident tries to leave or revoke their POA without medical justification, there's a review board. It's complicated. Complicated. Another word for trapped. Maybe we can take a drive out there next week, he offered. Just to look. Maybe, I said. Let me sleep on it. He left shortly after that, and I watched from my study window as his car pulled away. The moment he turned the corner, I picked up the phone and dialed the only person I trusted with this kind of mess, Charles Bennett. My lawyer, my friend, the man who'd helped me set up the legal protections around my company, my estate, and my legacy. Robert, he said, his calm voice sliding through the receiver like a scalpel, sharp and precise. You caught me just before a meeting. Everything okay? Not quite, I said. I think my son and his wife just tried to murder me, and now they're trying to trap me in a retirement home so they can take everything I have. Silence on the other end. Then, I see. Come in tomorrow. First thing. We'll deal with it. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun lazy circles above me. Everything felt different now. My house, my memories, the family dinners we used to have in this very kitchen, the bedtime stories, the scraped knees and father-son camping trips. How had we gone from, I want to be like you, Dad, to this? I wasn't sad anymore. I was angry. Angry that my own flesh and blood thought I was a weak old man who could be bought out, moved away, and quietly erased. The next morning, Charles had coffee waiting for me in his office. Tell me everything, he said. And I did. The party, the champagne, Linda collapsing, Vanessa's reaction. The visit from Daniel with the pastries and glossy brochure. The power of attorney paperwork. Do you have the bottle? He asked. The champagne? Still sealed and sitting on my kitchen counter. Don't touch it. I'll have a courier pick it up and take it to a lab we use in litigation cases. Discreet, confidential. And the documents? I slid them across the desk. He read through them quickly, his brow furrowing. This isn't just POA, he said. This gives Daniel full control over your accounts, assets, and healthcare decisions. If you'd signed this and moved into Cypress Grove, they could have you declared mentally unfit in a week and move the rest of your funds into a trust they control. That's what I was afraid of. Then we don't waste time, Charles said. We get your mental competency on record today. I'll schedule an independent evaluation with a geriatric psychiatrist I trust. No connections to them. Once we have that, we restructure your estate so tightly that no one touches a dime without your signature. And if they try again, then we'll have law enforcement on standby. He leaned back in his chair and gave me a small, tight smile. They think you're playing defense. Let's show them what offense looks like. And just like that, I wasn't an old man being manipulated by his son. I was a CEO again, planning my next move. By the time I left Charles's office that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't felt in days: control. Not comfort, not peace, but control. The old muscle memory kicked in, the same instinct that had built my company from a cluttered garage into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. When people underestimate you, especially at 72, the most satisfying response isn't rage, it's precision. Back at home, I put the next phase of the plan into motion. I called a security firm Charles had recommended, discreet, efficient, expensive. By 8 a.m. the next morning, 3 nondescript vans pulled into my driveway. Over the course of the day, technicians installed motion detectors, door and window sensors, and 8 high-resolution security cameras with cloud backups. One even pointed directly at my front porch, angled perfectly to capture the expressions of any unexpected guests. I told my neighbors I'd been having issues with package theft. It was a lie, of course, but a believable one. Every suburban neighborhood has that one guy with a porch camera and a nervous smile. Might as well be me. While the techs drilled into door frames and calibrated sensors, a courier from Charles's firm delivered a thick envelope to my study. Inside were all the updated legal documents, a completely revised will, new financial structures, and explicit medical directives. Charles had done a masterful job. The new estate plan was bulletproof. Daniel's share had been reduced to a modest trust $40,000 per year for life, non-transferable, and tightly monitored. The rest of my assets would go to educational initiatives in underserved communities, a few longtime charities, and a scholarship fund in my wife's name. As for Vanessa, she received nothing, not even a mention. Attempted murder tends to disqualify you from the in-laws with benefits category. That evening, as I reviewed the final documents over a glass of bourbon, the doorbell rang. I checked the camera feed before answering Daniel, and Vanessa stood on my porch. She wore a professional-looking coat and clutched a leather folder. He looked tense but composed. "Showtime." "Dad, we need to talk," Daniel said the moment I opened the door. "Of course," I replied, stepping aside. "Come in." They sat in my living room. Vanessa perched on the edge of the couch like a ballerina preparing to bolt. Daniel looked around the room, and his eyes flicked up to the new security camera in the corner. "New camera?" he asked. "Package theft?" I replied. "You know how it is these days." Vanessa cleared her throat. "Robert, we've been thinking a lot about what happened at the party. With my mother." "Yes, terrible situation," I said softly. "Still not sure what caused it." "Well," she continued, voice wavering slightly, "we just feel awful. If anything we brought caused her to get sick." "You think it might have been something you brought?" I asked, watching her squirm. "Well, we don't think so. But just in case," she said quickly, "we'd feel better if we could, keep an eye on you for a while." "Keep an eye on me," I echoed. "How thoughtful. Temporarily," Daniel added, "just until the doctors confirm what happened to Linda. You could stay with us, or we could even stay here if that's easier." "You're really worried about my safety," I said, leaning back in my chair. Vanessa nodded, clasping her hands tightly. "We love you, Robert. Your family." "So much love lately," I murmured. "It's overwhelming." "We just think," Daniel continued, "it's time to think seriously about Cypress Grove. It's not about getting rid of you, it's about peace of mind." I let the silence stretch. I said, "you're right. At 72, anything could happen. That's why I spent yesterday updating my estate plan." The room chilled instantly. Vanessa's spine straightened. Daniel blinked rapidly. "Your estate plan?" she asked carefully. "Yes. After Linda collapsed, it really made me reflect. I realized my old will was outdated, didn't reflect recent developments." Daniel swallowed hard. "What kind of changes?" I gave him a smile I'd once used in boardrooms before dropping bad news. "Just rebalanced some things. Made sure everything reflects the people and causes I trust." Their expressions tightened, but neither spoke. The fear behind their eyes wasn't grief. It was uncertainty, not knowing how much damage had already been done. "Anyway," I continued, standing to refill my drink, "I'll be just fine here. Between the cameras and the reinforced locks, this place is a fortress." "Well," Vanessa said, standing quickly, "we're glad you're taking precautions." "I always do," I said, "and thank you both for your concern." They left a few minutes later, and I watched through the monitor as they sat in their car for 10 minutes, arguing silently. Vanessa made a call. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but the wild gestures and Daniel's desperate attempts to take the phone away told me everything I needed to know. They were panicking. They knew they'd been outmaneuvered, they just didn't know how badly yet. I sipped my bourbon and watched the shadows stretch across the floor. Tomorrow, I'd begin Phase 3. But tonight, I allowed myself a rare pleasure knowing that the game wasn't over. It had only just begun. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor, Linda. She stood on my porch wearing a thick wool coat over hospital scrubs, her eyes shadowed but alert, clutching her purse like it contained every ounce of stability she had left. I hadn't expected to see her so soon, let alone unannounced. "Robert," she said, voice brittle but clear, "I need to talk to you. It's about the other night." I let her in without hesitation and guided her to the kitchen, where the sun spilled through the window like nothing had happened. I poured her a cup of tea, my hand steady, hers trembling slightly. She took a sip, then set it down with a faint clink, as if grounding herself. "Vanessa told me I had a bad reaction to one of my medications," she began. "Said I must have taken something on an empty stomach. But Robert, I don't take any medication. Haven't for years." I stayed quiet, watching her carefully. "That champagne," she continued, her voice growing firmer. "It tasted strange, metallic, bitter. I only had a few sips before everything got hazy. But I remember seeing Vanessa near the drink table earlier, doing something with a small bottle. My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. What kind of bottle? One of those little dropper ones. Like something you'd use for essential oils. She thought no one was watching, but I was right there behind her, chatting with your neighbor. What's her name? The one with the schnauzer. Denise. Yes. Vanessa didn't notice us. She poured something into one specific glass. Then she turned and acted like nothing had happened. Linda's hands were clenched now, her fingers white. "Robert," she said slowly, "I think she meant that glass for you." "She did," I said calmly, "and I switched it." Linda stared at me, stunned. "You knew?" "I suspected. I watched her pour it. I didn't say anything, just waited for an opportunity. You happened to be standing closest." Color drained from her face as the weight of it hit her. "She tried to kill you, and I almost died instead." I nodded. "Yes." We sat in silence, the quiet between us heavy and absolute. Then Linda leaned forward. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to give them exactly what they want," I said, "just not in the way they expect." Her brows knit together. "Meaning?" I met her gaze. "It means my son and your daughter are about to learn that some games come with higher stakes than they ever imagined." That afternoon, I placed a call to an old colleague, Patricia Voss, a retired intelligence analyst who now ran a high-end private investigations firm out of Boston. We'd worked together during a particularly tense merger a decade ago. If there was dirt to be found, Patricia would unearth it. "Robert Mitchell," she said when she picked up, her voice sharp and warm at once. "It's been years. Congratulations on the sale, by the way." "Thanks, but I've got a personal situation. I need to know everything about my son's finances. His wife's too. Bank accounts, credit cards, hidden assets, loans, everything." There was a brief pause. "You sure about that? Sometimes what you find in the dark changes how you see the light." "I'm sure." "All right. 48 hours." While Patricia went to work, I set the next trap. I called Daniel and asked him to lunch, just the two of us, at one of our old haunts from when he was fresh out of college. A quiet Italian place with dark booths and even darker secrets. He arrived looking rattled, wearing the same expression he used to wear before final exams. "You said it was urgent?" he asked, sliding into the booth. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told him. "About Cypress Grove. About preparing for the future. And you're right." His eyes lit up. "Really?" "Yes. I called the facility. They have an open unit, but I need to submit paperwork and the entrance fee by Friday or it goes to someone else." Daniel's relief was palpable. "That's not a problem, right? You've got the funds." "Of course," I said, "but I'd like your help with the forms. I'm not great with all the financial disclosures and tax implications. You and Vanessa could walk me through it?" "Absolutely," he said quickly. "Anything you need, Dad?" I smiled and took a slow sip of my espresso. "There's just one more thing. The facility requires a power of attorney, someone to handle decisions if I become incapacitated. I was hoping you'd agree to take that on." He tried to play it cool, but the hunger flashed in his eyes. "Of course, I'd be honored." What he didn't realize was that Charles had already prepared a decoy set of documents, By the time I signed them, the only account Daniel would have control over contained exactly $1. The real estate, the investments, the company payout, everything else had been safely moved beyond his reach. I was feeding him a fantasy, and he was swallowing it whole. Patricia called early Thursday morning, just as the fog outside was beginning to lift. Her voice was as crisp and clinical as I remembered efficient, no fluff. "Robert, I finished the report. It's worse than you thought." I sat up a little straighter in my chair. "How bad?" "They're drowning," she said flatly. "Daniel and Vanessa have refinanced their house 3 times. 2 active mortgages and a maxed-out home equity line of credit. Their combined credit card debt? Just over $82,000. I let out a low whistle. How are they staying afloat? Barely. They're shuffling payments credit cards to pay credit cards. It's a house of cards waiting to collapse. I rubbed my temple, but she wasn't finished. Vanessa's spa hasn't turned a profit in 4 years. It's technically still open, but she's using it to mask personal expenses, luxury goods, travel, jewelry. Most of the operating capital has been drawn from joint accounts. And Daniel's firm? It's been in the red for 2 years straight. He's defaulted on 2 contracts and is currently being sued by a former client for breach. I sank back into my chair. So the party, the sudden interest in my well-being, it was all desperation. "No question," she said. "But there's one more thing. Vanessa took out a life insurance policy on you 6 months ago, $500,000. She listed herself as the beneficiary, under the title of caregiver and family representative. My blood ran cold. She claimed insurable interest? Yes. It likely passed under the radar. Because Daniel is your son, they probably assumed she was managing paperwork on his behalf." I closed my eyes for a moment. A $500,000 payout tied to my death. A poisoned glass. A rushed plan to isolate me. Every piece of the puzzle was sliding into place. But Patricia wasn't done. "There's a recurring payment on Daniel's business account to a Dr. Richard Steinberg, geriatric psychiatrist. The payments started 3 months ago. Small amounts, listed as consultation fees." My breath hitched. Steinberg. The name scratched at the back of my memory. Then it clicked. That's the name on the Cypress Grove paperwork. The one who does competency evaluations for new residents. Exactly. I dug a little deeper. He has a reputation. His evaluations tend to align very closely with the preferences of the families who hire him. You're telling me they were planning to declare me mentally incompetent? It looks that way. A paper trail of consultations followed by a diagnosis, followed by full control over your estate once you're tucked away. I didn't speak for a moment. I simply stared out the window at the quiet street I'd lived on for nearly 3 decades. The same driveway where Daniel had learned to ride his bike. The lawn where he and I had built snowmen. The porch where he used to sit and talk about his dreams. And now, he was trying to erase me methodically, legally, and if necessary, lethally. "Thank you, Patricia," I said finally. "You've done more than I asked. You want me to keep digging?" "No," I said. "Now it's my turn." That afternoon, right on schedule, Daniel and Vanessa arrived at my house. Vanessa was dressed in pale blue, soft and sympathetic. Daniel looked more confident than he had in days. They came bearing paperwork admissions contracts for Cypress Grove, financial disclosures, and of course, the power of attorney document. They spread everything out on the dining table with the precision of people who thought they were finally crossing the finish line. "This is the main contract," Vanessa explained, tapping her manicured finger against a thick sheaf of pages. "This one's your asset report. It helps them calculate monthly fees. And this," she said, sliding the final paper across to me, "is the power of attorney form. It's pretty standard. Just gives Daniel the authority to act on your behalf if anything ever happens." I picked it up, pretending to read closely. The language was intentionally vague but terrifying in scope. Financial control, medical decision-making, legal authority. With one signature, I'd hand over everything. "This seems broad," I said mildly. "Do I really need to give this much power away?" "Dad," Daniel said gently, "it's just a precaution. Cypress Grove requires it. And honestly, at your age, it's good to have someone younger handling the more complicated stuff." There it was again. At your age. The refrain they kept leaning on like a crutch, trying to convince themselves that theft was protection and betrayal was love. "What if I change my mind?" I asked, looking at Vanessa. "What if I don't want to stay at Cypress Grove?" She paused, then gave a rehearsed smile. "Well, the facility does allow transfers, but there's a process, a waiting period, medical reviews. It's not immediate. In other words, once you're in, you're not getting out." I looked at them both, their expectant faces practically vibrating with anticipation, and I smiled. "Let me sleep on it," I said. "I'll have an answer for you in the morning." And that answer I already knew would be a war they never saw coming. After they left, I sat in my study, their neatly stacked paperwork still on the dining table, untouched. Outside, the sun dipped below the trees, casting long shadows across the lawn. But inside, everything was crystal clear. There was no more doubt, no more benefit of it. My son and his wife weren't trying to help me. They were trying to erase me. Quietly, completely, legally. I picked up the phone and called Charles. "What do you know about a Dr. Richard Steinberg?" I asked without preamble. He didn't need context anymore. Not with the way things had escalated. "Steinberg?" he repeated, the name clearly not foreign. "Geriatric psychiatrist. Specializes in mental competency assessments." "Why?" "Because Daniel's been paying him for consultations under his company's name for the past 3 months." There was a pause. "That tracks," Charles said slowly. "He's known in certain circles for being, let's say, cooperative. If a family wants a loved one declared incompetent, Steinberg can usually find something in his notes to justify it." "Even if there's nothing there?" I asked. "Robert, in this state, an evaluation like his, especially paired with the right narrative, can form the foundation for a conservatorship petition. If they got that in place, they could legally lock you away and assume control over your finances, your health decisions, your property, everything. Even if I have a will, if they claim diminished capacity before the revisions were made, they could argue that your new estate plan isn't valid, that you were manipulated, confused, or unwell at the time. If a judge believes it, they could throw it out." I clenched my jaw, heart steady but burning. "Then I want something in writing. Official. We'll do the evaluation with someone you trust, and I want the paperwork drawn up that makes every dollar bulletproof. They want a game? Let's give them a war." By noon the next day, the evaluation was done. Clean, sharp. The psychiatrist asked me to recite addresses from memory, recall news headlines, interpret proverbs, and solve logic puzzles. I passed everything with ease. I wasn't just competent, I was dangerous again. And with that confirmation in hand, Charles finalized the trust. A structure so secure, so legally sound, that not even a team of lawyers could unravel it. My assets would be moved into an irrevocable trust, managed by a financial firm I'd worked with for 2 decades. If anyone attempted to challenge my mental capacity again, the trust would automatically shift to a set of philanthropic organizations and research funds. If Daniel and Vanessa pushed, they'd get nothing. If they stayed silent, Daniel would receive $40,000 a year, enough to keep the illusion of a future alive, but never enough to recoup what he thought he'd inherit. The documents were signed, notarized, and delivered back to my home in a black leather folio, which I placed inside the safe behind my bookshelf right next to the video backup drives from my security cameras. Meanwhile, the bottle of champagne, still 3/4 full, was quietly picked up by the lab Charles had arranged. I didn't need the test to confirm what I already knew, but it would help ensure law enforcement had more than my word if this went where I suspected it might. Just before dusk, the doorbell rang again. Daniel and Vanessa stood side by side, trying to look casual. This time, Vanessa was in soft beige cashmere, no makeup, her expression carefully controlled. Daniel carried a messenger bag, and for the first time in days, I saw sweat at his collar. "Have you had time to think about it?" he asked as they stepped inside. "I have," I said, "and you're right, it's time." Vanessa's face lit up. "Oh, Robert, I'm so relieved. You're doing the right thing. I've even signed the paperwork," I added. "All of it." I handed Daniel the folder containing the faux power of attorney, the Sunset Grove forms, and fake account access. Details Charles had drafted to mimic the real thing down to the routing numbers that led to a separate holding account with exactly $1. Daniel opened it like a man unwrapping treasure, scanning the pages with wide, greedy eyes. This is... wow, great. Vanessa was already pulling out her laptop, entering information, her fingers dancing across the keys like she was defusing a bomb. I'll get this sent in tonight. That way you can hold the unit before the deadline. I watched them carefully how they worked like a team, like they'd rehearsed this moment for months, like they'd waited for the day they could finally take everything from me. One more thing, I said, casually checking my watch. My attorney is stopping by in a few minutes. Just to go over the final transfer terms, tax optimization, you understand. Daniel looked up, startled. You didn't mention... The doorbell rang. That must be him now, I said, and walked to the door. But it wasn't Charles standing on my porch. It was Detective Lisa Morrison and another officer from the local police department. Mr. Mitchell? She said, holding up her badge. We need to speak with you regarding an incident at your residence earlier this week, a suspected poisoning. Oh? I turned and glanced back toward the dining room. Vanessa had gone pale. Daniel was frozen, his hands still clutching the folder of lies. What? She said, her voice cracking. That was just a reaction to medication. The doctor said, Actually, ma'am, the detective said evenly, pulling a small notebook from her coat. Toxicology results from the hospital show your mother ingested a concentrated form of oleander extract. That's not a medication. It's a lethal poison. The silence in my living room was heavier than concrete. Vanessa dropped her coffee. And the game, at last, was over. Vanessa's face collapsed in on itself, a perfect mask of fear trying to hold the shape of innocence. Her lips parted like she wanted to speak, but no words came, only shallow, rattling breaths. Daniel, still seated, looked from her to the detectives and then to me, a flicker of something painful crossing his face. Not guilt, exactly more like realization. He had just walked into a room expecting to win, and instead he'd wandered into a trap. Poison? He said hoarsely. You must be mistaken. That doesn't make any sense. The bottle of champagne from the party was tested, Detective Morrison said, flipping open her notebook. It contained traces of oleander extract, the same toxin found in your mother-in-law's bloodstream. That's impossible, Vanessa stammered. Why would I poison my own mother? That's what we're trying to determine, the detective said evenly. But what makes this more complicated is that the glass with the highest concentration of the poison, the one most likely intended as the primary target, wasn't the one your mother drank from. It was originally placed near Mr. Mitchell. Vanessa visibly flinched. That's not true. Actually, I said, my voice calm as stone, I saw you pour it into my glass, the chipped one I always use. I recognized the vial. You thought I wasn't paying attention, but I was. Vanessa turned to me, her expression a mix of betrayal and rage. You switched them, she whispered. You knew. I knew, I said, and I waited, because I wanted to be sure just how far you and my son were willing to go. Daniel stood up suddenly, pushing the folder of fake documents aside like it had scalded him. I didn't know about the poison, he said, hands raised as if expecting handcuffs at any moment. I thought it was just a plan to convince you, to scare you a little, to help you see you weren't safe alone. So you were involved, Detective Morrison said, her pen moving steadily across the page. In the planning, at least. Not like this, Daniel said. She told me, she said... He stopped himself. His voice broke. I studied him for a long moment. This man standing in my living room was not the boy I'd raised, but a stranger wearing his face. You helped her create the nursing home plan, the power of attorney documents. You paid off a psychiatrist to declare me mentally incompetent if I didn't cooperate. You sold me out for a future you didn't want to earn. Daniel looked like he might crumble. It was never supposed to go that far. But it did, I said, and the only reason I'm still breathing is because I saw it coming. The second detective stepped forward. Vanessa Hartwell, you're under arrest for attempted murder. The click of the handcuffs was surprisingly loud in the silence that followed. Vanessa's head dropped, her voice a cold hiss. You think this is over, Robert? You don't know what you've done. Actually, I said, I know exactly what I've done. I've survived. She was led out of my house without another word. As the door closed behind her, Daniel sank onto the couch, his face hollow. The adrenaline, the performance, it all drained out of him in one slow exhale. I didn't speak. I just watched him. She said it was just about helping you, he mumbled after a long pause. She said you were making reckless decisions, that you were slipping, that if we didn't act, you'd waste everything, everything Mom worked for, everything you built. So you decided to take control, I said, to protect me from myself. We're in debt, Dad. We're drowning. My business is failing. We're behind on the mortgage, the credit cards, the school tuition. So you thought you'd speed up the inheritance? I said coldly. Skip the grief and go straight to the money. He didn't deny it. Instead, he said the one thing I feared most. At first, I didn't think it was that serious. I thought maybe if something scared you like a break-in or a health scare, you'd be more willing to sign things over. But when Vanessa brought up the idea of taking matters into our own hands, I didn't think she meant poison. I really didn't. And when you realized what she meant? I asked. He met my eyes. By then I was too deep in it. I convinced myself it wouldn't happen, that she was just bluffing. You were hoping the bluff would work, I corrected. And if not, well, at least you'd be rich. His silence was the only answer I needed. I stood slowly. You should leave, Daniel. Dad. Before the detectives change their minds and decide to arrest you too. Go. He hesitated. What about the power of attorney, the trust? All fake. That power of attorney gives you access to a checking account with $1 in it. The real money? Protected. Forever. You'll never touch a cent. You destroyed everything, he said, his voice cracking. No, I said, staring at the man who used to be my son. You did. He left without another word, and I sat in my chair long after the door clicked shut. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even disappointed. I was done. And for the first time in weeks, I felt peace settle over me like a blanket. Not because justice had been served, but because I had served it myself. 3 months passed. The garden was in bloom again. Early summer sun warming the petals of the roses my late wife had planted years ago. I sat on the back deck, a mug of black coffee in my hands, watching bees drift lazily between flowers. The silence of the morning was no longer threatening, it was earned. Peaceful. Real. The house, once shadowed by suspicion and betrayal, now felt like mine again. Secure. Guarded. Alive. Vanessa had been sentenced to 15 years for attempted murder, the judge showing no leniency given the calculated nature of her crime. She'd laced that champagne deliberately, methodically, knowing full well the damage even a few sips of oleander could cause. Her defense had tried to spin it as a mistake or accidental overdose of natural supplements, but the jury saw through it. So did the DA. She never stood a chance. Daniel's case was murkier. He wasn't charged with attempted murder, but he couldn't escape the paper trail, the psychiatric consultations, the coordinated documents, the financial manipulation. He pled guilty to conspiracy and was sentenced to 3 years. 2 in prison, 1 under strict supervision. The day the verdict was handed down, I didn't go to court. I didn't need to see it. I'd already seen all I needed, the look in Daniel's eyes when he realized I wasn't the naive old man he thought I was. That moment, back in my living room, when the truth caught up with him and wrapped around his ankles like a noose that was enough. The night after sentencing, I received a call. Grandpa? Lily's voice was soft, careful, unsure. It's me. I hadn't spoken to my granddaughter since everything happened. I hadn't wanted to drag her into it. She was just 16, too young for courtrooms and betrayal, too innocent for poison and lawyers. But she wasn't a child anymore. Hi, sweetheart, I said, my voice steady. I'm glad you called. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, I didn't know any of it. What Mom and Dad did, I didn't know. I believe you, I told her. None of this is your fault, she sniffled. I hate them for what they did to you. No, I said gently. Don't hate them. Let the law deal with them. You just keep being better. That's how we fix this one good choice at a time. A long pause. Can I visit you this summer? I'd love that, I said, and I meant it. A week later, she came. We cooked pancakes together, worked in the garden, played chess in the evenings like we used to when she was 9. She was taller now, more guarded, but her eyes were the same. Curious, sharp, kind. One morning she handed me an envelope. Inside was a printout of her college acceptance. Northwestern University. Pre-law program. I looked at her and smiled. Pre-law? Yeah, she said. I figured, if someone tries to hurt people like you again, maybe I can be the one who stops them. I didn't cry, but I came close. Your grandmother would be so proud, I said. She always said you'd change the world. You already did, she replied. After she left, the house didn't feel empty. It felt hopeful. I saw her name written into the new version of my trust contingency funds for her education, her future, her first business if she ever needed it. It wasn't a reward. It was a message. This is who I believe in now. Charles stopped by a few days later with an update. The insurance company is voiding Vanessa's life insurance policy on you, he said, handing me a letter. Given the conviction, they're refunding all premiums she paid. They should send it to Linda, I muttered. She's the one who almost died. Speaking of which, Charles continued, the court has granted your trust full protection. It's ironclad now. No further challenges allowed. And if anyone attempts to declare you incompetent in the future, the trust immediately shifts to charity. Perfect, I said, signing the final page. And the house? Daniel's creditors seized it. There's an opportunity to buy it if you're interested. I shook my head. Let someone else have it. Someone who earned it. After he left, I poured myself a small glass of scotch and stepped out onto the deck again. The sky was lavender, streaked with gold. My home was quiet, but never lonely. My world, once filled with deceit, was now fortified by truth. I'd built a fortress not just of walls and cameras, but of legal armor, of wisdom, of experience. They had underestimated me. They'd forgotten that a man doesn't survive 7 decades of life, 45 years of business, and the loss of a spouse without learning how to fight and how to win. They thought age meant weakness. But age, when combined with clarity and strategy, is strength. The kind of strength you don't see until it's already buried you. My phone buzzed. A text from Lily. Just turned in my first research paper. Elder Financial Abuse and the Law. Got an A. I smiled, heart full. Sometimes the best revenge isn't punishment. It's protection. Of yourself, of your legacy, and of the people who still deserve your love. I may be old, but I'm not done. Not even close. If you've made it this far, thank you. Stories like this aren't just entertainment, they're cautionary tales, reminders that trust can be broken in the places we least expect. And that strength doesn't come from youth, but from clarity, experience, and the courage to protect what matters. If you found this story compelling, thought-provoking, or even just empowering, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It helps us continue creating high-quality narratives that dig deeper than surface drama stories that resonate, challenge, and sometimes heal. And while you're at it, let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from? What would you have done in Robert's place? We read every comment, and your voice truly matters here. Whether you're here for justice, for storytelling, or simply for a reminder that age is not a weakness, it's a weapon, you're in the right place. And there's more where this came from. So go ahead, click that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join a growing community that values smart, meaningful content. We'll be here, bringing you stories that stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Thanks for watching, and remember, never underestimate someone just because they're older. You might not see the fight coming until it's already over.